Hello, welcome back to JV Foodie. Today is almond butter crunch day. We've got 2 recipes for you, so let's see how these go. The first recipe we are going to try is much more simple compared to the second recipe, and it's also the recipe that came up first for me when I googled almond butter crunch. This recipe is coming from All Recipes, and there's only 5 ingredients for this, so let's get started on that. The first thing we need to do is get our baking sheet set up. So you're going to want a large baking sheet. You're then going to want to line it with aluminum foil, making sure that the aluminum foil goes up the edges just so we can cool all of our almond butter crunch out once it cools. And then you're going to take some leftover room temperature butter. I have about 2 tablespoons worth of leftover room temperature butter, and I'm going to make sure that I get this butter into every crevice I can and make sure that every part of this surface is covered and ready to go. Now to making the almond butter crunch part. We are going to, over a low heat in a saucepan, add 3/4 of a cup or 168 grams of butter, 2 cups or 432 grams of white sugar, and 1 cup or 141 grams of roughly chopped almonds into our saucepan. According to the recipe, at this point you want to stir these ingredients constantly until they all start to boil. Once you start to see boiling happening, you want to stop stirring or shaking the mixture entirely. This is where we ran into issues for this particular recipe. We stirred pretty constantly for a good while. At first, it's going to look sandy and it's not going to look like it's doing much. You have to give it time for the sugar to start to melt and come together with the butter. It will eventually start to look a lot looser and kind of goopy, and you want to keep going until you start to see a boiling happen. Now, at a certain point, it had started to look like it was boiling. I was getting those large bubbles coming up to the surface, and I stopped stirring and shaking, and I added my candy thermometer because you need this mixture to come up to anywhere between 300 and 310 degrees Fahrenheit or 149 to 154 degrees Celsius, and then you want to let it hit that temperature before you do anything else. We sat here for a good half hour watching this mixture try to come together, and it wasn't. This is the issue I mentioned a moment ago. So we let it sit there, not stirring, not shaking. You start to see some darker caramelization happening on the edges, and you see kind of what looks like a bubbling and things are moving inwards, but things were not cohesive. I started to notice there was a layer of like liquefied butter on the surface, and things were not incorporating or mixing well. Things were not melting, and honestly, I started to panic. It just was not looking correct. Things were just not looking like they were coming together as like what is supposed to be, in essence, almost like a caramel, or you're supposed to have a syrup type texture to this, and that was not what I was getting. Everything was still very much clumpy and separated. So I did the unthinkable and I started to stir it, and that was probably a mistake because it started to seize up, but we had been sitting there for, I want to say, over half an hour, like I mentioned, and things were not going well. After taking a moment to stop and reassess, we ended up adding a little bit of water. I wish I could tell you the actual measurement, but we didn't. We were just doing it kind of eyeballing it, and that actually allowed the mixture to come together into what you see now. So now we have like a mixture that ended up coming together looking like caramelized sugar and was cohesive. We let this mixture come up to that 310 degrees Fahrenheit before we moved on. Once your sugar butter mixture has come up to temperature, you're going to take it off of the stove, and it is immediately going to be poured into our prepared baking sheet. So you're going to dump that right in there, get it as spread out as possible, and once you do that, you want to then immediately take your 2 cups worth or 330 grams worth of chocolate chips and sprinkle them right on top of your hot sugar mixture so that the chocolate can melt and you can start to smear that chocolate all the way across to get a nice chocolate layer. While the chocolate is still melted and gooey, you want to use your last bit of almonds for this recipe. So the last bit is half a cup or about 72 grams worth of finely chopped almonds. They're going right on top. You can even press them in a little bit to make sure that they stick, but you want to do this while the chocolate is still like melted so that everything sticks together. You then need to let the whole thing cool down before you can do anything else with it. So you can pop this in the fridge, or you could just set it off to the side until everything cools down and solidifies. Once it has cooled down, once everything has become solid, you can then break it apart. So you can use a knife, or you could just use your hands. I started with a knife, but then realized it was way easier to just use my hands to break it apart. As you can see here, it peels right off of the foil because of all that butter we put in there, and it just breaks off into different size pieces. Like, it just falls apart. This was pretty good. It had the almonds in the actual sugar and butter mixture, and it kind of tastes like toffee or brittle. So, I mean, not bad. I liked it. It was good. It was not my favorite though. So let's talk about my favorite butter crunch recipe. Okay, so almond butter crunch recipe number 2. My favorite one is coming from Liz at Rosemary and Maple. And even though this one is more work, the payoff is fantastic. So the first thing you are going to do for this recipe is you are going to toast some almonds. So I have a baking sheet lined with aluminum foil here, and I am adding 1 cup or about 118 grams worth of almonds. The recipe calls for blanched almonds. I just used the almonds I had in my cabinet. So whole almonds is what you want for this part. They are going into a 350 degree Fahrenheit or 176 degrees Celsius oven, and you are baking them for 5 to 6 minutes. Once they've sat in the oven for 5 to 6 minutes, you want to take them out of the oven, and then you are going to push all of your whole almonds off to the side. You need to make room for your sliced almonds. That's why you're pushing them off to the side. So I am adding half a cup or about 59 grams worth of sliced almonds to the now empty half of the baking sheet, spreading them out evenly, and then they are all going back into the oven for 4 to 5 minutes. Once 4 to 5 minutes have elapsed, you are going to take your almonds out of the oven and set them aside to let them cool down for us to use later. While your almonds cool, use this opportunity to set up your baking dish. So you're going to want to use an 8 by 8 inch baking dish, and you want to create a parchment paper sling so that you can just lift up the almond butter crunch when it's done and ready. So do that first. Once you're done creating your parchment paper sling inside of your baking dish, you're going to want to take 2 tablespoons or about 28 grams worth of butter, melt it, and then dump that melted butter right into your dish and spread it around with either your fingers or a utensil, a pastry brush of some sort, and make sure that you get all of the edges and crevices. Once your almonds have cooled, you now need the help of a food processor. So into a food processor, you are adding your roasted whole almonds, and then you are going to pulse them until only a few large pieces remain. After you've got some nice pulsed toasted almonds, you are going to take half of that mixture and you are going to sprinkle half of your ground almonds into your greased parchment paper lined baking dish. You can spread them out evenly, making sure you get a nice even layer across everything. I used my fingers for this, and then now it's time for some chocolate. Into a microwave safe dish, you are going to add half a cup or about 87 grams worth of chocolate chips and microwave for 20 seconds, stirring every time until they are completely melted. Once you have a nice melted chocolate mixture, you are then going to pour that on top of the almonds inside of your baking dish. Now, for me, it said to spread the chocolate evenly across the almonds, and that was not working well. I was not able to spread the chocolate without taking the almonds with it, so I ended up just mixing it all together. Don't worry, it doesn't look great right now, but it ends up tasting delicious. Now you can set your baking dish off to the side and put the remaining half of your ground almonds into a dish and set it off to the side. You'll need it for later. And then to your food processor, you're going to add the remaining 1 cup of your chocolate chips, and you're going to pulse until there are only a few large pieces left. Set your chopped up chocolate chips off to the side for later, and now let's get to making the actual butter crunch part. Having learned from my previous mistakes the day previous, I am using a larger saucepan. It is going over medium heat, and to that saucepan I am adding my half a cup or 113 grams worth of butter, my 1 1/4 cup or 265 grams worth of white sugar, 2 tablespoons or 30 milliliters worth of water and 1 tablespoon or 15 milliliters worth of corn syrup. And then I am going to stir this mixture constantly until the butter is completely melted. This mixture came together so much better than the previous one. It was a night and day difference. This is probably due to the water and corn syrup that was added to this, but everything came together and melted beautifully. Once your butter has melted, you want to stop stirring and you want to add your candy thermometer to the saucepan. You're going to add your candy thermometer to the saucepan, turn the heat down to just below medium, and you're going to cook this mixture until it reaches a temperature between 290 and 295 degrees Fahrenheit. This mixture took about 20 minutes to come up to temperature, and you can start to see the changes happen in this mixture, and it's just so different. You can see the color change, you can see everything sticks together. There was no breakage or separation from the butter and the sugar. It just all starts to get that caramelized brown color, and it was beautiful and it smelt amazing. Once your mixture has come to temperature, you are then going to immediately remove it from the heat, and you are going to stir in 1 teaspoon's worth of vanilla extract. We know that I don't like to measure vanilla extract out, and it was the last of the bottle, so sorry. And then you are going to add 1 teaspoon or 5 grams worth of baking soda and mix that in as fast as possible, because you then need to pour this mixture directly into your prepared baking dish. In order to make sure that you get a nice even layer for your mixture in your baking dish, you can gently tap it against the table or the countertop, give it a little couple safe drops in order to evenly disperse the mixture. While this mixture is still hot, you need to add your ground up chocolate chips. So sprinkle them on top, give them a few seconds to start to melt, and then with a spatula, start to swirl together the chocolate so that you get a nice melted, even chocolate layer. While the chocolate is still melted, you then need to sprinkle the remaining ground up almonds that you have on top, and also your toasted sliced almonds need to go on top as well. So get that all on there while the chocolate is still melted, and gently press things in with your hands so that the almonds can adhere. Once you are done building your almond butter crunch, this needs to go into the fridge, and it's going in for 10 to 15 minutes according to the recipe, or until it sets. For us, it actually took closer to 45 minutes for this to completely set and cool. So it'll take however long it takes. Once it is cool and set though, take it out of the refrigerator, and then as you can see, you can lift it straight out of the baking dish with the help of the parchment paper sling, and then you can start to break this apart with a knife, or like I said previously, you could use your hands. I started with a knife here, and then I think I ended up going to my hands again. I don't remember. Probably a mixture of both, okay? So this one though was the winner. This one was by far, hands down, better than the previous recipe. There is a thicker layer of the crunch, but I like that, and it also breaks apart in a different way than the first recipe due to the baking soda we added. So it's kind of like a honeycomb texture, but not quite honeycomb. It's really, really good. And having the chocolate on both the top and the bottom, and the fact that the almonds were toasted, just upped the flavor dramatically. So even though this is more work, you have to toast the almonds, chop them up, chop up the chocolate chips. It is worth it. So I hope that you give one of these recipes a try, even if you're like, that second recipe, it's just too much. I don't have time for that. The first recipe is still really good, but if you have the time, I would definitely try the second recipe. So I hope that you enjoy National Almond Butter Crunch Day. It's also National Candy Month, so there's that for you. If there is an almond butter crunch recipe you think I should try, leave it down in the comments below. And until next time, bye everybody.